Hello and welcome to episode 40 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And as always, we're reading Anthony Kenny's A New History of Western Philosophy. And in this section, we are reading about political philosophy in the modern era of philosophy.
I was really surprised by how thin this chapter was.
Yeah, there's only like 16 pages or so, I think.
I don't think he's at all interested in political philosophy.
Really?
I think he loves Kant.
Mm-hmm.
What was the other one? Wittgenstein? Didn't he talk about him a lot?
Yeah, he talked about Wittgenstein a lot.
But
well, to be fair, Wittgenstein like completely changed his philosophy. So there's like an early Wittgenstein and a later
true.
Wittgenstein.
Yeah. So he gets a double treatment.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll have to do that a couple times. Well, I've already done that a few times, but nobody's paying attention. So
yeah, you're not going to be in any textbooks, I don't think. No,
Well,
maybe you will if you do something.
Well,
important.
I was thinking that the other day. I'm 51 now. I have to start doing something creative.
Really?
I haven't done anything creative in my life other than creating 4 boys, which is a different kind of creation. But what's her name? The gal who wrote Little House on the Prairie.
Oh, I can't think
Laura
of her name.
Ingalls Wilder?
That's
the character.
No, that's the author.
That's the author.
Yeah, you're right.
She didn't start writing until she was in her late 50s, I think.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep. So it's inspirational.
There you go. You still have time.
I'm thinking of being a poet.
Yeah. Really?
An angry, cynical poet.
Well, if it makes you any more confident, Bilbo Baggins was 60 when he went on his adventure.
Yeah, but that was in Hobbit time.
That's true.
So,
well, no, he was still pretty old. Well,
not really.
Yeah.
He was younger than me in Hobbit years, I would think.
I guess only slightly though.
Well, he
I guess they reached like maturity at 30, so I guess he'd be like. Well, they reach maturity at.
Maybe he would be about my age.
Yeah, there you go.
I need to go on an unexpected journey.
I'll pay someone to dress up as a wizard and show up at our front door.
Well, the problem is there has to be like a really evil. Well, actually, maybe we will. I will have an adventure.
There is an evil force.
I will have an unexpected journey soon when the people of the fascists come and invade our country.
It won't be a wizard knocking on your door. I
have to prepare for the defend the Shire. Go out and, although I think I'd be a little bit more violent. I don't know. Who knows? I've never really been violent, so everybody likes to think that they would be brave in those circumstances, but
you never know until you're in one.
Yeah,
really.
Much more likely to be peeing my pants and crying like a little girl, I guess.
That's uplifting.
Than to be super brave man.
Speaking of uplifting, we're going to talk about utilitarianism first.
Yes.
So this is, of course, Bentham's big ideology. You know, the greatest happiness of the greatest number.
I do like how Kenny does criticize this, or at least point out the flaws of it very, very effectively. You know, how do you figure? And we talked about this in a previous thing. How do you figure out whether you're going to maximize happiness or a calculation, or maximize the number of happy people, or maximize happiness?
He gives us this kind of example of, if you scaled happiness from 1 to 10, or 0 to 10, and would it be better to have 80% of the people have 10 happiness, and 20% to have 0, or to have like 60% have like 8 happiness and 40% to have like 6 happiness?
Right.
The 80 or the 60-40 split, yields to like 500 something points, while the 80-20% or 80-20 split leads to 800 points. And so if you're valuing that leads to more points, but do you value the amount of happy people or the amount of happiness, actually?
Right. And despots would maximize the few having a lot of happiness, and everybody else, fuck you.
Essentially.
And utilitarianism it gets bogged down in that. I mean, how do you figure out how to maximize it? How do you even know?
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of capitalism, is that it's decentralized, and everybody's going to do what they think is in their best interests. And as long as you have a system of laws set up so that you can have enforceable contracts and agreements between each other, then you let the millions and millions of decisions being made, billions maybe, depending on how big your economy is, being made at that time with the best available information move forward. And that's the beauty of it. That's the genius of it, is the lack of planning.
Yeah.
and you don't have to calculate.
Mm-hmm. You're not relying on some higher authority to calculate your happiness.
To figure out, okay, how are we going to maximize the happiness? Well, as soon as you ask that question, you're doing the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. And then when you act on it, you are maximizing the unhappiness. That's just the practical realities of it, is because you're going to have to put a thumb on the scales to try to increase the relative happiness of some people over others. Mm-hmm. And all you're going to do is make some people unhappier. You never are going to make other people happier. It just doesn't work out. But so it seems like he does a good job explaining it and then quickly dispensing it with any utility of the utilitarianist argument.
Mm-hmm. He then, kind of moving on from this criticism of utilitarianism, Kenny goes on to describe some of the things that Bentham may have been better at, especially in regards to the penal system. And he says here, Bentham does, "The immediate principal end of punishment is to control action. This action is either that of the offender or of others. That of the offender it controls by its influence, either on his will, in which case it is said to operate in the way of reformation, or on his physical power, in which case it is said to operate by disablement. That of others it can influence no otherwise than by its influence over their wills, in which case it is said to operate in the way of example." So really that's the three big purposes of any penal system.
And he is wrong.
Really?
Yes, because there's more.
Well, really?
Yes. Well, I mean, there's at least four.
Mm-hmm.
But he talks about three of them. Mm-hmm. He talks about incapacity, because it basically keeping someone from doing something in the future, which is locking them up.
Mm-hmm. He talks about is disablement.
Disablement. Deterrence, which is sending a message to all the other people. You better not do this.
What he says is example.
And then he talks about punishment. Mm-hmm. Punishing a crime just because they have to suffer a punishment. And I think he talks about, he doesn't talk about restitution, which is a different purpose for the criminal justice system. And I would say he talks about punishment and he kind of equates it with retribution. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a difference between punishment and retribution. Like the punishment is basically you do the crime, you do the time. Mm-hmm. Retribution is you did something bad and we are going to hurt you, right? You know what I'm saying? And the hurt could either be, in our system, it's you put you in a cage, or we kill you, if the crime is bad enough. And so, so the restitution or making the victim whole is not part of his deal. Mm-hmm. And he kind of equates punishment with the retribution or revenge, I think.
So you'd have, I guess, five
categories.
Points, yeah.
Right.
So you'd have example, disablement.
Deterrence.
Yes. Deterrence, disablement, reformation, restitution, and punishment.
Correct. Right. And so, and I think that, the only one that is favored now, it's I forgot rehabilitation. Because I have restitution, but there's also rehabilitation.
Well, I guess would that be reformation?
That's his reformation.
Well, I said that in my 5.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Okay, good.
So 5.
Good. So I mean, all we talk about now in modern day America is rehabilitation. Mm-hmm.
And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about quite a few episodes ago about Freud. Kind of how you said, all criminals are kind of now looked at as if there's something wrong with them.
Correct.
And how you can heal them. Yeah, right. An illness rather than they just chose to do a bad thing or they are bad people and they should be punished for that.
Right. And what we're seeing now in the last couple of years, and you see this quite frankly in the urban areas with the gang warfare, is that they've lost. Well, of course, they lost deterrence because because the criminal justice system doesn't act fast enough and efficiently enough to get justice, meaning incapacitation, deterrence, and punishment. And so then people just need. There is a need, like for a murderer or a rapist, there is a need, societal need, an individual need for punishment. That person has to suffer some consequences, or they lose faith. The public will lose faith in the criminal justice system for those heinous crimes. Now, we're not talking about shoplifters and that kind of stuff. There has to be a punishment for that, but where there has to be a pound of flesh You have, like, for child molestation, it's like somebody rapes somebody's child. That offender has to suffer some consequence, whatever we deem as appropriate. We don't want to torture them, but it has to be something so that the crime gets reported to the police.
Yeah.
Because what we have now in the urban areas, and I'm not picking on certain areas, but you have certain parts of our society where there is no justice other than street justice. So that these murders, a lot of them are back and forth murders. They're between different groups, and it makes logical sense to not report the crime, but to kill the offender the next opportunity. That's why you see so many shootings at funerals.
Yeah.
You know, because the family members of they got one of the people that they wanted to kill, and they know everybody's gonna be at the funeral, so they want to get the other guy who killed one of their friends.
Yeah.
And then they shoot up a funeral visitation or whatever the case may be. And so if you don't have that, it doesn't work. And he doesn't seem to value that kind of punishment for the sake of punishment. Doesn't seem like he's really into the deterrence. I think the most persuasive of the uses of the criminal justice system statistically is incapacitation.
Yeah.
Because there's no doubt that those people can't commit crimes while they're behind bars. But in today's society, we don't value punishment or retribution or whatever you want to call it. All we want to do is rehabilitate these people. And some people will benefit from that. A significant population of the criminal justice system.
Just to be clear, you're not arguing, in favor of just completely eliminating any sorts of rehabilitation.
No. But there is a need for punishment. There is a need for incapacitation, and that's just not looked at. And there is a real devaluation of deterrence, and people don't understand deterrence is real.
Yeah.
And the people, especially in the what I call the criminal subculture, they know the going rate. Okay, so what I mean by that is they have friends, relatives, and associates that have committed crimes and are in jail. At any given time, there are people that have friends or family members in jail. Like I would joke that in St. Louis County, you listen to these the more serious crimes. You listen to their jail calls, and the first calls they're making out to family or friends, they're discussing who's in there with them. Hey, my Uncle Joe's in here. I haven't seen him in years, and here he is. And what's he in for? Well, he did a robbery, or he did this, or he got caught with drug trafficking, or whatever the case may be. And they absolutely know, if you steal a car in St. Louis City, you will not go to jail. They absolutely know that if you steal that same car in Farmington, Missouri, you will most likely go to prison if you get caught. Especially if you're from St. Louis and you went to Farmington and you stole the car. They have no compunction about sending you away to prison for a long period of time because you came into their community and you stole them. It's not to say that you're going to get off with a slap on the wrist if you steal a car down the street when you live in Farmington. But the same is not true if I go into St. Louis City and steal a car. I'm going to get a slap on the wrist. Everybody gets a slap on the wrist up there if they even prosecute you for it. And that is known. And because of that, there is no deterrence. And that's a huge deal because the system is overwhelmed right now.
Bentham kind of says that, but he really is in favor of just reducing punishment really as a whole, making it frugal. He says the loss should be greater than any gain for the criminal. So he does agree with you there.
Right.
But then he kind of goes on to say, punishment is really just an evil. It should only be used to deter greater evil. It should always be very frugal, using only basically the lowest punishment available to make the loss greater than the gain.
And he's a product of his times. So I would different times of American history, I'd be more agreeable to that point of view because the punishments were more severe.
Yeah.
A horse thief would get hung. Well, I don't, back then they would do it, but now I don't expect somebody to steal a car or a horse for that matter to get hung.
Yeah.
And so I think he's right in a sense that it has to be proportionate, and it has to be effective, or it's unjust, but there's a balance there. Anyway,
absolutely.
It's kind of my subspecialty or whatever, so I don't know what to say about that. But.
That's all right.
But I mean, you could have. Well, of course, there's entire books written Crime and Punishment and the philosophy behind those.
Mm-hmm.
But moving along.
So then we move on to John Stuart Mill, and he's all about liberalism. And so with this, he kind of says, here, I'm going to read this section.
Which is a different type of liberalism than our current leftists.
Yes, it's more libertarianism.
Correct.
Is what he's talking about.
Classical liberal.
He says here on page 963, he says, there needs protection also against the tyranny of the prevailing opinion and feeling, against the tendency of society to impose, by other means than civil penalties, its own ideas and practices as rules of conduct on those who dissent from them, to fetter the development and, if possible, prevent the formation of any individuality not in harmony with its ways.
Yep.
So what he's saying here is really it's not even that we just kind of have to restrict the government itself from trying to impose its own beliefs on us, but we also have to have ways for the minority, to have that right to not just be suppressed by the complete majority, to not conform to the popular opinion of the time. That has to be protected in any society.
And he is absolutely right about that. Yep, the tyranny of the majority. It's worse to have a true democracy than to have a monarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Because that mob will get you, or you'll be the mob getting somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just human nature.
Yeah.
Pile on.
He also says that no authority has the right to suppress expression of opinion. And with that, he says, if all mankind minus one were of one opinion, and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind.
Agreed.
So what he's kind of saying there is, he kind of breaks that down and says that, even a false opinion, even if it's not true, has value in challenging the kind of the contrary opinion of the majority and ensuring that truth is not a prejudice or formal profession.
Correct.
It's not something that's just sort of inherited from, the higher ups. It's not something that we are all expected to agree to at all times.
Right.
Even if you're completely dead wrong, it's still valuable for you to argue against us, just to have that opinion be heard in any sort of fashion.
Right. And you have people now that equate opinions or articulating opinions as violence. The same thing as if I punch you in the face, and that they are little despots, little Hitlerian fascists who believe that, and all they're really trying to do is just keep anybody from being influenced by an opinion they disagree with.
Yeah.
And I think those people should have frequent and harsh violence visited upon them. I am joking.
Yes. So John Stuart Mill also kind of goes on to say that, basically people should be able to do really whatever they want so long as it's not harming others or infringing upon the rights of anyone else. He says that individuals' rule of conduct should be their own character, not traditions or customs of others. He also says that individuality is completely essential to mankind. Without individuality, we'll really achieve nothing.
I think there's some truth there, but there are also limits too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I agree.
We can't let people just descend into madness and not care for themselves. There has to be a certain amount of control over them, especially if they're ill.
Mm-hmm.
But again, what we talked about earlier, it's hard to tell the difference between somebody who's mentally ill and somebody who's just contrarian or odd, so to speak.
He then goes on to talk about kind of the role of women in the society at the time, and he says that the legal subjection, he's really talking about marriage here, he's talking about the legal subjection of one sex to the other is wrong in principle and a complete obstacle to progress. And he says that it's harder for women to rebel against their husbands than any other rebellion in history.
Boy, if only that were true.
Wow.
Well, he's again, that's a product of his time
at the time,
because now it's and I think it's
Anthony Kenny kind of mentions that later is all of these very major obstacles to women to having any rights kind of in their own opinion against their husband have been very much removed in most developed societies today.
And it wasn't too long ago that you couldn't be charged with raping your wife. If you were legally married, it didn't matter whether she consented or not. The marriage was the consent. That's just horrible. It's just horrific.
It's terrible.
And so those laws in the United States, of course, have changed. And some other areas, like Afghanistan, they don't have those niceties. Although recently we did fly the rainbow flag above the Kabul embassy.
Oh, that's nice.
I don't know if you knew that. It was the last month.
That happened.
Now, today, as we record this, there is the flag of the Taliban.
Yes, this will be very out of date when this finally comes out. As we're talking, the Taliban it's August 3rd. Nope, not 3rd. Wow. August 13th? 16th. There we go.
Yes.
I was thinking 3 days basically have transpired since we've, by and large, moved our military out and the Taliban has taken over the entire country of Afghanistan.
They'll move pretty fast. The events will move very fast. So, yeah, by the time this is listened to by our listener, a lot of things will happen. And hopefully the Americans that were left behind and the American soldiers and Marines that were put back in to try to get them to escape will do so safely. I suspect that they'll be okay because I'm sure we'll be paying huge bribes to the Taliban to allow our people to leave.
Yes.
Because we basically surrendered the military base, the Bagram Air Base, and so now we're using the civilian airstrip. And I got to tell you, all they need is one bomb, really one suicide bomber on one plane, and that whole place shuts down.
Yeah. And
those guys don't get out. I mean, they'd have to get in helicopters and go to some other location. Good luck with that, man. I mean, they could really wipe out our people now that they have all of our weaponry. Anyway, so hopefully everything will work out okay in the short term, and then we could leave that country to those illiterate goat herders to do whatever they're going to do to each other. And good luck and God bless.
Yeah, it's a complete mess.
But those women better wear the burqas. Then you see the report. There's a CNN reporter.
Yeah,
yesterday she's in regular Western clothes. Today she's got the headscarf on.
Yep.
And God bless her. She's brave because she's there and they're chanting "Death to America" and she's like, "Oh, they seem really nice." It's like they seem pleasant. But they are chanting "Death to America." I mean, she's brave and stupid,
fiery but mostly peaceful.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like she almost had to say that while they're there. I mean, she's risking her life, and God bless her. I hope she gets out okay.
Moving on to Kierkegaard and Schopenhauer on women.
Yeah, Schopenhauer, isn't he? He had lots of good
women.
stuff.
No,
it's so funny.
Not.
And that the women are childish.
Well, we'll get to that in a second.
Oh, come on, we
got to talk about Kierkegaard first.
Okay, yeah.
So Kierkegaard really goes on to first kind of defend marriage here. He says that wedding is really the beginning of a truly romantic love.
Truth.
And love is the one worthy reason for marriage.
True.
So he's kind of saying here is, we see all these marriages really for, political gain or for monetary gain or for, especially at his time for really the subjugation of women, is what he says. It has to be really founded on love more than anything.
Right. There was a lot of arrangements, I think, back then.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope, I suspect there are a lot of people who got married for love, don't you think?
I would think so. He also kind of goes on to say that duty really helps to display love in a marriage.
True.
There are a lot of people arguing kind of at the time that we should kind of get rid of, or nowadays really is there's too much duty to your spouse or that sort of thing. He really says that duty is really what helps to display love, and that's really a fundamental part of marriage is that duty to each other.
I will tell you the secret.
Oh boy,
to a successful marriage.
Oh, please tell me.
It is, they have to have love there, of course.
But, is there a but? Yeah, that's a but.
I think the most important attribute, quality, and emphasis is on loyalty. You have to be loyal to your spouse. So even when you're pissed, if someone says something bad about your spouse, you should defend them.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't just go around bad-mouthing the spouse to other people. No, you're going to complain to your buddies, or work things out, to talk things out. But I think that loyalty also keeps you from cheating because you should have an utmost loyalty. You're on the same team, and if you cheat on your spouse, then you're disloyal. And if you're loyal in all ways, like of course I'm a funny guy,
yes,
and I have not knowingly experienced anybody flirting with me in quite some time. It may be happening, but I doubt it. But back in my relative youth,
Yes.
I'm sure there would have been some flirting with me. I'm offended by it.
Really?
If the person knows I'm married. Because,
I would, yeah, absolutely.
Because it's an insult.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's basically saying, I'm better than your wife.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Oh.
No, I considered it that is true.
Yes.
Now I'm going to be really mad if anybody flirts with me. No, it's an insult to me to assume that I would cheat on my wife.
Yeah.
Or I would do inappropriate things, and it would make me angry. And me in a surly mood is not conducive to interpersonal relationships.
Yes.
So it's really kept me out of trouble.
I absolutely agree with that.
Because if I get insulted by somebody, the first thing I'm going to do is really insult them back.
Yes.
And so if they're flirting with me, it's an insult, and guess what's coming out of my mouth? Something that's going to criticize them.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I thought your pro tip there was going to be in a much different direction, but that was
really?
actually very, very good advice. I don't know, but I did not expect it to be serious.
Now that's good advice for you going forward. So and that's my philosophy. Like for the people that get divorced or whatever, I still don't understand why people cheat on their spouses, because divorce first, other lady second. And that should be the order. If you want to leave,
because otherwise it's just an insult to everybody involved. I would think,
and it's a degradation. And of course, I can go on forever about the institution of marriage and why, even conservative Catholics or conservative Christians shouldn't care about gay marriage anymore, because we've so denigrated the institution of marriage in the United States. Welcome to the party, pal. You want to have a meaningless commitment like everybody else does, where half of them end up in marriage, and who knows how many people are even loyal to their spouse. Sure, sign up. You two
fix marriage first before complaining about everything else.
Right. So it's like, what more harm can we have done to the institution of marriage that hasn't already been done? And what more harm is going to come to it by having a couple of guys get married to each other, a couple of ladies get married to each other? It's like, at some point, I'm just like, I don't even care anymore. It's weird to say that, but, and then there's a whole argument that it shouldn't be, the government shouldn't even be involved. It's a really a religious ceremony and commitment. But anyway, because we're in political philosophy, so I think that's relevant to the politics of it.
Very much is. So Schopenhauer disagrees with just about everything you just said. He says that the purpose of women is to have children. That's right. And that they were made beautiful only enough to attract a man, really to produce more or less, a child or two. Correct. And after that, they just get ugly and nobody wants them.
Yes. The beauty, the purpose of the beauty has been served. So that's why it fades away over time. Yeah. It's brilliant. I mean, there's a lot of logic to this.
It's ridiculous. Absolute nonsense, but it is logical to a degree.
And their character...
Well, he says they're weaker, physically weaker, and that has led to them... mentally weaker. That has led to them to have a great lack of justice, because they have to be more cunning to be on the same bar with men.
Yes, that lady tricked me into that.
Yes.
I didn't need to have my pants on.
And they also... Jesus. He also says that women completely lack creative ability in the same way as men. So men are better.
Yes.
And then he also said that the law made a mistake giving women equal rights without equal reasoning powers. And by this he doesn't mean equal rights, to like vote and things like how we think of equal rights now. He says, the equal rights of monogamy, and that a man should be allowed to have as many wives as he wants. Because polygamy, really actually benefits women, because, I don't really know what he says there.
Yeah, I thought it was like every woman needs to be married, but not every man does.
That's true.
So even sharing a husband is better than having no husband at all.
That's true. Yeah, that's what he says. And it helps...
There's a little logic to that. This guy's making a lot of sense to me.
He does not. Do not say that. He also says that polygamy helps, regularize the satisfaction of men.
Yeah.
So, there we go.
He's an interesting cat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like him either, but I think I hate Marx more.
Yeah, that's true.
Marx is more dangerous.
And then Kenny kind of throws in just another little bit about John Stuart Mill here, where he says that the state has the right to limit population to control the reduction of the value of labor. So with his whole libertarianism sort of deal, he says that the state does still have the right to control the population, and he kind of defends that on the grounds of, controlling the population is really a benefit to the individual.
Except for the individual that you keep from being born.
Yeah, but it's more beneficial to the rest of the individuals, because then they, with more people, your value is worth, or the value of your labor is worth less. So he's saying, you're just trying to keep the value of your own personal labor high, which is just a really kind of brutal, very much utilitarian argument to the whole thing, which is very strange because he's kind of portrayed here as the counterpoint to Bentham's utilitarianon.
Yeah,
and strange.
It mirrors my theory about people voting. I don't want anyone other than me to vote. They say we need to have more voting. No, we don't. The less voting, the better, because they're just diluting my vote.
Yes.
But mine actually makes more sense. I'm not saying take away the right to vote. I'm just advocating that no one else vote.
You decide the president, and you alone.
Yeah, wouldn't it be great? For me.
Oh yeah, it'd be great for you.
For me, I could, I can elect all the local and county and state and federal officers and in my jurisdiction. I mean, I couldn't control the entire Congress, but why do I want to have a higher turnout?
Yeah,
that's so counterproductive to anything that any individual wants as a voter.
I guess that's true.
Why am I advocating?
I've never
for more
thought
turnout?
about it like that. Yeah,
because really, and then when you start thinking about that. Then you ask yourself, well, why are they advocating for it? They're not advocating for it for everybody to have higher turnout. They want their own people to have more turnout. They only want people that agree with them to vote.
Well, that's,
more.
This is kind of off topic, but that's kind of like the same argument that I see when, applying for, Puerto Rico for statehood and for Washington, D.C. to become a state and that sort of thing. Well, it adds, those are largely Democratic states.
For now.
Yeah. And it would add, more representation for the Democratic Party within Congress and within the...
Right. So similar arguments are made back in the westward expansion about slave states and non-slave states.
It's not a new argument.
Of course, the slave states were, of course, Democrat states because they were the racists and they loved slaves. Well, they loved to have slaves. They didn't really love slaves.
Yeah,
the people that loved slaves would be the Republicans in the North.
Yes. Moving on.
Just so we have that cleared up.
Moving on to Marx on capital and labor.
What a jerk he is.
He is.
And he's so wrong about everything. But I get, it really is like a religious view of history and of the world. And he has a critique of the bad political systems that preceded him. And then he has, as Kenny correctly points out, he has no specifics on how you go to the future utopia of communism.
Well, he kind of starts out with just basically describing his whole worldview, and he says that society is entirely dependent upon the relations of productions. So, who produces things, essentially. And he says that there are 6 stages to human progress. We start off with primitive communism, within just like our own little tribes.
Which is not primitive communism. I mean, it's not communism, but go ahead. I mean, there's a hierarchy in every primitive tribe. Yeah. There always has been, always will be, but go ahead.
Then he says the next stage is slavery.
Which still exists and has existed throughout human history until who ended it? Western European culture ended it. Yes. Period. And nowhere else ended it. We ended it.
Yes.
Go ahead.
And so with slavery, he says that's the first, stage in history where we see a distinction between 2 classes, the slaves and the free men.
Except for slavery has been around for the entire history of humankind.
Yes.
Go ahead.
And so then he says we move on to feudalism, and that's where we see, the feudal lords over the serfs. So that's the next stage of the 2 class divides.
Which is nothing different than the primitive communism that actually existed in the tribes because you always had a hierarchy.
Yes.
Go ahead.
And then we move into capitalism, and this is where he sees now the hierarchy of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the rich basically over the poor. The rich have the means of production, of course, how he sees it, and then the poor basically have nothing except to just, slave for work. It's kind of how he puts it.
Except for they actually have a value.
Yes.
In their labor, at least in their labor, and they can accumulate wealth if they work. Unlike him, Marx, who didn't work at all, and then his children starved to death.
Yes.
What a horrible person.
And then after capitalism, which
one
is
of those guys that if he had never lived, the world would be a better place.
I agree.
Probably. I shouldn't say that with definitive because we're not supposed to judge like God. Only God decides.
And then after capitalism, which is where we're at now, he says, we'd move into socialism, according to his worldview.
We'd all get fed up, and
and then
we'd revolution,
and we'd install a dictatorship
yes.
to kind of fairly distribute the means of production.
Because that always works out for everybody's benefit.
And then after that, we just, very vaguely, he has no actual way of how we'd get there. We'd move into communism, where the dictatorship dissolves and we are all equal. Ooh. Never actually puts a plan into how this would actually be achieved.
How you transition from a dictator,
it's very
which
much
is no different than the feudalism, really, to this utopian communism.
Yeah,
it's a religion.
He has literally no sort of description of how to get there. He just portrays it in these very heavenly, this is the end goal terms, basically. Right. And so he says that capitalism is in crisis due to its nature. Basically, it's doomed to fail, and that's how we usher in socialism. And so the reason it's kind of doomed to fail is he goes into this whole long sort of distinction of how labor determines value, and that the value of laboring power is determined by the cost of keeping the laborer alive, well, and capable of reproduction. And so with that, workers now in capitalism are made to work more than necessary to keep them alive. And so when they're working these longer hours for unfair wages, this surplus value then just goes straight to the owner, basically whoever's in charge of all these workers. And that is the crisis of capitalism, is that the people working are not getting, what they deserve out of work. And it's going basically straight to the top, is what he sees capitalism as.
Right. That's his view.
Mm-hmm. And he says, then, to fix this, the only way to do so is to totally abolish the cash nexus, and then we can finally achieve a fair return for labor. And to that, I would kind of ask, how would we ever get a fair return for labor without some sort of, bargaining item?
Correct.
There's no tool otherwise that you can use besides, cash or some sort of bartering system that you can use to get a return for labor.
You have to have some sort of currency that you can convert labor to the goods and services that you need.
You can't just work on promises.
Correct.
Yeah.
There has to be something that sets the value for your labor, or for your goods, or your finished goods, or your products, or your resources. And that has to be either a monetary system or coins, or you can do a barter system that's terribly inefficient because the rate of exchange is uncertain. And it's just completely impractical, and I just cannot fathom why anybody. There are people that just buy into this.
The way he sees
year.
The way he sees it as working, without cash, is basically, the dictator would basically mandate, how you get your fair return for labor.
Right.
There would be no cash. You just work, and the dictator would give you what you need.
Right.
Which is absolutely ridiculous. That's just a complete sacrifice of any liberty that you would have.
Correct. Right. The government that can give you everything can take everything away.
Yeah, exactly.
But, it's this pie in the sky wish casting. We can do this, and it always turns out that the people in charge keep for themselves, and everybody else works for them. I mean, it's just human nature. It doesn't make any sense why anybody think would this work, or that they should follow this. It doesn't make any sense.
And I thought this section was very funny. Anthony Kenny goes on to talk about how Marx even describes communism, and he says that all we are told is that communist society will, quote, make it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, reel cattle in the evening, and write criticism just as I have a mind, without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, shepherd, or critic.
Yeah, right.
Isn't that nice?
Right. Right.
What does that even mean?
Right.
That just means you have free choice to do what you want in your free time, I guess.
Right.
Which is what you have under capitalism more than any other system.
That's correct.
Which is just absolutely absurd that he thinks getting a dictatorship to put these things in place would ever be the right idea.
Right, because he's just get back to work, plebes.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you doing over there, that pond? Get back in the factory, jackass.
And so then Kenny goes on to describe Vladimir Lenin's kind of view of communism, how it sort of
murderous, despicable person he was.
And he kind of differed very slightly from Marx in believing that the authoritarian elite will shape economic change by force. So really which is really just a more fleshed out version of the socialistic dictatorship,
right?
Which is just he kind of tried to apply more rules to Marx into how things would actually work. It's very much Marx's ideals just really carried out in action in the only way that it could really ever work with just a ruling class that would just change the economy as a whole.
Right. It's just an excuse to murder your enemies.
Yes.
That's really what it is, and to control everything. And Lenin only looks good by comparison to his successor, which is Stalin. He really murdered a lot of people. Mass murder, starved millions of people. I mean, just horrible, horrible.
Yes.
Anyway, moving along.
Moving on to closed and open societies. So we start off with Karl Popper, which is a fantastic name. He says that for a
lead singer of Blues Traveler.
What? Is that actually his name?
No, that's a different guy named Popper.
Oh, okay. He says that for society to flourish, its institutions must leave room for self-correction. So with that, he kind of means that, they all have to be able to correct hypotheses. The ruled should have the right to discuss and criticize the actions of the rulers, and it should be possible to change the rulers without bloodshed, which I think is very, very true.
Yes.
It should not just be the higher-ups say what they say, and that is how things work. There always needs to be that voice for change and to criticize, what's going on at the top.
Yep. Agreed. Have to have it.
And he also says that the state must protect the economically weak from the economically strong. There's
a lot of truth to that. You can't have complete unbridled capitalism.
Yes.
You have to have regulated capitalism, and the biggest danger, which is what we're in now, are the monopolies. And America learned that lesson when Teddy Roosevelt and those guys went against the what they call the trust busters to bust up these monopolies when they controlled enough of a part of the economy that they can set both the prices for the goods and the supplies, and they control the entire supply chain, and they just stuck it to people, and they got fabulously wealthy. And we're seeing that with our tech guys now.
And they're able to kind of skirt around the monopoly laws by saying, well, they're just, my partner in this, it's kind of like a whole subsidiary thing. Right. We're not one big corporation. We're a bunch of little ones that are just really joined together.
Well, you have like Google is the service provider for 90+% of all searches on the internet. It is long past time to break that up. I mean,
because at that point, it's almost not even just the service itself; it's the flow of information, which is even more dangerous than just a service.
Right, and you got like, and what they do is they're clever. They buy out any rivals. So Google has now YouTube. They used to be separate companies, but they bought out YouTube because a lot of people would search through YouTube, and so that was a competitor in the search engine. Oddly enough, it was basically a video site.
Yeah.
And so
even with
that
social media too. Instagram is owned by Facebook now,
it
which used to be different.
A rival. And that kind of consolidation is the perfect justification to have the government come in and sue. And there's laws in the books that can split those up. I remember when I was younger, the AT&T, which is the Bell telephone company, owned, I don't know what percentage they had of it, but I think MCI was another telephone company that existed at the time. But it was a small minority, and they couldn't break into it because it was a utility, and they controlled the phone lines. And they broke up into several, Southwestern Bell, and there's several other regional carriers. And there had to be an effort sustained over years to deregulate that industry and to divide them. The telephone rates were extraordinarily confiscatory back when I was in my 20s, just how much money you had to pay for long-distance phone calls. Like, you don't even know what a long-distance phone call is. But you'd have a phone number, your area code 636, let's say like my office line is 636-797. So the 797 is the second, the three digits. That was considered a regional phone line. But some other people in that area in Hillsborough had a 789 number. Well, that was a local number, and you paid just a little bit more for the 797. So I can call to St. Louis without having a long distance charge. But if I had 789, it would be a long distance charge. It'd be a couple bucks for a call. Yeah. It adds up, and now
especially in, a law firm like that where you have to make calls all the time.
Well, it really hit you and you can get a commercial line too. That was a little different, but your personal line is true of that too. And you make some phone calls, and the phone bill would come in, and there'd be no pre-approval or anything. It would just come in, and your parents would be like, "Why are you making all these phones? It's a $100 bill for making these long-distance phone calls." But we have the same thing going on. My point is, we have the same thing going on now, and he makes a good point that you can't have just unfettered capitalism, which would allow the rich to abuse the poor, and you have the super wealthy now that are buying up now the big push is to buy up the individual real estate market, where these big investors are coming in and they're buying up individual houses and neighborhoods, and they're cornering the market on real estate investment and pushing up the prices so that a regular young couple are going to be priced out of the market for a new home, but they're going to have to rent it. Mm-hmm. And then they rent these properties, and you can control the market that way.
Yeah.
If you own enough of it. Mm-hmm. And if you have $1 billion, you can do that. And we really need to get a control over that. And so I completely agree with this. That's a huge weakness in capitalism. You can't have unregulated capitalism. You have to have protections, just like you have in the Constitution for individual rights. Mm-hmm. You can't allow the super wealthy to just run roughshod over everybody. And that's going to be the next big push, and we're going to see it. And we're going to break up these guys, and it's going to happen soon, or we're lost. Mm-hmm. Anyway, go ahead.
And so then Popper kind of goes on to say, it's almost what I kind of read it as, it's almost like a criticism of Marx's ideologies, and what he says that, what form the future will take depends on what form scientific progress will take. So we could never really predict what's going to happen in the future.
Right.
Because, he kind of does agree with Marx here that everything is so tied to technology and the means of production, that to really try to predict what the means of production will even be is ridiculous, because we don't know.
Right.
And, we can't try to plan ahead for this, heavenly utopia almost if we don't know what the progress is actually going to be to get there.
Right. Yep. I'm with them, man. I'm with them.
And we talk about John Rawls for a little bit, and he says that utilitarianism places priority of the right over the good. Which I think is very much what you were saying earlier. It's, what would be, the most beneficial, but it's not exactly what is good.
Correct.
It's not morally okay in any fashion to diminish, the minority for the majority. Even if more people do benefit,
right.
We have to make sure the actions we're taking are good.
Yeah, and just. I mean, there has to be a system for that. You can't just. It's not a math equation. People's individual rights are not a calculation as to what we all, the majority of us decide.
And then this last bit here I thought was very interesting. He kind of puts forward how we should try to determine this just society, and he talks about this veil of ignorance. So he kind of, says, imagine, you have no idea what the color of your skin, your race, your sex, your age, anything when you enter into this society, and you have to plan it to be just for everybody. He says if we kind of assume that, we'll eventually get to this place where we have two big rights. We'll have the value of liberty, which is essentially equal rights. You can't discriminate based on race, sex, anything like that. And the value of opportunity, which is fair competition to offices and positions. And although there's fair competition, there won't be, equal wages or that sort of thing. There will always be discrepancies in, the amount of pay and the benefits that these jobs possess. And what he's kind of saying with this is that, when this veil of ignorance is lifted, nobody will be more disadvantaged than anybody else.
Right.
And I think that is very true, that just society, not just, not the Marxist kind of view of equal, outcome for everybody, but equal opportunity.
Right.
Of course, we do have to protect the rights of the individual, but we should not do it in such a fashion that everybody's outcome is exactly the same. Their opportunity should be the same, but not exactly the outcome.
Yeah, the only way you can get the same outcome for everybody or even it out is by bringing everybody down to the same level. Because some people will just not work hard as other people. And some people need that kind of drive for their individual success, and other people will trade off a day's wages to go fishing, because they value that more. And so how do you calculate that? If somebody's a workaholic and they love working 12-hour days, another person barely gets through 8 because they just can't stand it. Well, why would the 12-hour day guy get paid the same as the 8-hour day guy? And Marx's system doesn't really account for that, other than to say, well, it's the same.
Well, eventually
value.
that won't matter, is what he says.
Right,
Eventually we'll be in communist utopia where anybody can do what they want.
Yeah,
it's like, well, okay, how do we get there, Marx?
Yeah, we can't. It just doesn't work. It's awful, horrible person.
Yes.
Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Well, that was the last of the philosophers for this section. I thought this was a very interesting chapter.
Yeah,
I really liked reading this.
Yes, I agree.
I think it's probably the most applicable to today out of any of the chapters in this book.
Well, yeah.
Because it is the most modern, of course.
I think I have the most interest in political philosophy of all the philosophical inquiries, because everything else is very theoretical and very tied up in definitions and theory and all that stuff. This is,
you love categories.
yes, and political philosophy is you can talk about theory, but it's all, I can hear you drinking, which is awful.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought I was far enough away from the
No,
mic.
you were not.
Oh, that's really gross.
You just lost our listener. But political philosophy has some practical aspects to it that the other areas don't. That interest me because there has to be a theory behind. It's really governmental administration. It's really public policy, but.
It's theoretical, but it's still grounded in something.
Correct.
You're not just making things up.
Yeah, there's real world consequences if you choose the path of Marx or you choose the path of. I don't think he had any. Did he have Adam Smith? I think he did.
No. In previous chapters, yes. Not in this one.
So it was pretty light on the political philosophy throughout the whole thing because the political philosophy in ancient Greece was very robust. I mean, they had. Every one of those little city-states had their own constitution. Yeah. I mean, there are hundreds of them, which is wild to think of.
And I guess at some point you do kind of have to limit yourself onto how much you go into political philosophy without it becoming a politics textbook.
Yeah, that's true.
So this is a philosophy.
All right. That's what I wanted to read. Anyway. It was good. It's good.
Yes,
what's our final one? God,
yes. And
as is appropriate.
So next week for our listener, this will be the final episode of season 1.
Penultimate.
This is the penultimate episode. Yes.
The next one is.
No.
The last one is penultimate, isn't it?
No, that's the ultimate. Penultimate is before ultimate.
Oh, this one is the penultimate.
Yes, this is the
penultimate.
Penultimate. Yeah, penultimate episode of Unlimited Opinions.
Excellent.
For this season. We'll continue. We have no idea what we're going to do. But we have enough of these backlogged that we have like a month and a half before we actually have to figure out what we're doing.
And prayers out to the people of Afghanistan.
Yes,
well, the good people. There's got to be some of them over there.
Yeah. That was uplifting. On that uplifting note, this has been Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
Still Mark Bishop.
Be Mark Bishop. That was very interesting. Good episode.
I am interesting.
I was not saying that.
Oh.
So sorry.